This is Truth Be Told. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Truth Be Told. We're super excited. We're already in the month of January. Can you believe it? 2020, a new year. And in honor of the month of January, we are going to be talking about human trafficking. It is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. We're super excited. We have a special guest today, Holly Christine Hayes, and we are so excited to have her here. Jen, we miss you. We can't wait to have you back. And we're going to be talking about human trafficking today. Now, Holly, our special guest, actually has an organization that we're going to talk about later that we're super excited about and very passionate about here at the table. But I just wanted to talk to you ladies about this issue and just some things that are close to your heart maybe about the issue in particular, and maybe some fun facts that you know that maybe we could share with our audience that maybe they don't know about.
It's hard to think of fun facts.
I know. I'm like trying to, you're trying to make it accessible to people because sometimes it's very difficult. Like people don't want to talk about it. It can feel very dark, but I feel the more that we make it relatable and the more conversations we have about it that feel a little bit less like, you know, the more people will be aware of this issue and the more people that will participate and help end this modern day slavery.
There's a great documentary out called Nefarious. I'm not sure if you guys have seen it, but it was the first time that I really had my eyes open to the trafficking movement and kind of how prevalent it is. Like we kind of, I think sometimes say, oh, of course that happens in like Tijuana.
Over there.
You know, like over there. But like the fact that it's happening in our backyard. I used to live in Redding, California, and the I-5 went from Mexico all the way up to Canada, and it was the most trafficked piece of highway in the entire country. And so for me, I was constantly like aware of it. We had a truck stop just outside of Redding that was known as like a trafficking hub for girls, and it was just like, it put a lot of fear in me, actually, and so, but it raised my awareness of it all and just how prevalent it is in our backyard and not just in over there in someone else's backyard.
Well, even just to backtrack, I mean, just in that, like, I know personally, too, I've had to ask a lot of people, like, what is trafficking? Actually, and when we polled our audience, we got, you know, some people who said, hey, actually, I don't really know what trafficking is.
Honest. That's honest.
And, you know, some people are like, hey, yes, I do, but what can I actually do about it? So maybe we can get, like, a definition, just kind of, you know, moving forward in the episode, like, what is trafficking?
So sex trafficking, so there's different types of trafficking. So sex trafficking specifically is a commercial sex act performed through force, fraud, or coercion. So commercial sex act meaning there's money being exchanged. So someone is paying for sex. And it's specifically trafficking if the person who is being exploited for sex is, or the person who's being paid for the sex is doing that through force, fraud, or coercion. So a question that I get a lot or that we get a lot is all prostitution trafficking? And I would say most is because most of the time there is sort of a pimp behind the scenes who's pulling the strings, who's manipulated that woman into that lifestyle. Very few women choose a life of sex work. And if they are choosing that life, oftentimes they're choosing it from childhood damage. In my case, so I was trafficked from the ages of 19 to 21, and that came that exploitation came because I had had sexual abuse in my childhood that made me more susceptible to it. And so a lot of the women I was around who considered themselves sex workers and maybe would even say they were choosing it, no one really chooses that so life. True. Like no healthy, well-adjusted woman who knows their identity in God would choose that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you were sharing that because there are different types of trafficking, and some other ones are forced labor, bonded labor, involuntary domestic servitude, and child soldiers. And we're going to also leave some descriptions of all these other ones so that you guys can understand a little bit more about trafficking. I think mostly we focus on sex trafficking just as a society, and even I think for women, it's very close to us. And I kind of really want to focus on that because I think that's where a lot of our information, even here today, and just kind of our passion stands. But trafficking, there are all different types of trafficking. And so if you're curious, there are great organizations that are educating every single day about different types of trafficking. A21 campaign is also a really great organization. go check out their website, and they're really great at not just telling you what it is, but actually giving you stats and statistics on like every single region around the world, which is very important because I think a lot of times we just focus on our own area, but we don't realize that it's a global issue. And the fact that a lot of times when you're living on border states, you know, especially with sex trafficking, as soon as they get them over those lines, a lot of times they go international. So it's very important to be educated about laws and different trafficking around the world as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think people, they don't realize the correlation with porn and strip clubs and human sex trafficking, because I think that there's still coercion in all of those instances, or there's desperation, and that's their opportunity to like be okay. But
Absolutely, it creates the demand.
Yeah.
Because you can't have a product without a demand for the product, right? And so I think we're seeing such a rise in sex trafficking because we're seeing such a rise in accessibility to pornography and things like that. And so men are seeing on not just men and women. Let's be real about pornography. Men and women are seeing sex portrayed in this certain way in pornography, where it's like, I can have anything I want. It should look violent, you know, whatever they're being exposed to, then they're seeking that out in real life. And a healthy, well-adjusted woman in the context of a relationship might not be interested in that kind of sexual relationship. And so they're going and buying it. And a lot of times men who are buying sex don't even realize that the women they're buying the sex from are not choosing that life. The Johns will often lie to themselves and say like, oh, I'm helping her pay for college, or, oh, you know, it's just a business transaction, and
they try to justify
it, and they don't realize that there's something going on behind the scenes for that woman, that where she's being forced into this life, where there's some sort of force, fraud, or coercion. And I'm really passionate about talking about the link to addiction as well, because either women are choosing to get into a trafficking type relationship, sometimes out of necessity because they're addicted, or traffickers are getting young women addicted to drugs in the midst of this. So there's this stronghold of addiction happening that blinds them and that really keeps them in chains.
Well, and don't the pimps, they typically try to fill the void of like a fatherly or a lover figure in their lives, and then they create that dependency so that, and I know that they like target at-risk youth and like kids that are trapped in the system. They're going to target people who don't know love, or if they do, it's really manipulative.
Yeah, low self-esteem.
Yeah.
That was the case for me. So it's called a Romeo pimp. And it literally, you guys, I'm embarrassed how long it took me to realize I was trafficked, because for years I thought he was my boyfriend. He was my boyfriend. I mean, I still sometimes will call him like my ex-boyfriend. And I've had to be really clear and be like, no, my trafficker. Because he had other women. And I knew that, but I just wanted to be his favorite.
You wanted to be loved.
I wanted to be loved, love had been so perverted for me, and I had such low self-esteem. And then this man came along and said, you have value. It's what a man will pay for you. And so oftentimes a misconception I'll hear a lot about trafficking is the pimps will make the women feel like they have no value, and they'll, you know, like squash them to the point that they do this. But in my case, and I think in a lot of women's case, this was the first time I'd heard I had value. And so me getting paid for sex in that transaction, even if he kept the money, felt like I had value, and it felt like I had worth, and it felt like a step up from maybe a life of promiscuity that I'd been in before, because at least now I had value. And so, I mean, you can imagine how valueless you'd have to feel as a human in order to agree with that being your value. But this is the issue we need to look out for in young women, young women with low self-esteem, young women who have come from abusive families. Those are the women who are going to be prey for traffickers, who are going to come along and say, I'm going to keep you safe, I'm going to help you out, I'll show you that you have value, and then all of a sudden they're into this horribly exploitive world.
Well, I love that you're talking about value, you know, because I know we were talking with, or I was speaking with our mutual friend Kim Biddle, who founded an organization called Saving Innocence. And
Big fans.
Which is also a great anti-trafficking organization if you're, you know, looking around.
And they do a lot of policy work, changing policies in the government,
which is huge,
and incredible work they're doing.
Good. And you know, I was just talking like, okay, so why do like beyond just being kind of horrified at what happens, like, tell me more about the issue in and of itself and why every human should care about this. And really, it's because it boils down to value. Like, humanity, or every human has value, and when we remove that as a culture, then we are slowly, like, dehumanizing each other, right? And so that's why it matters to every single person to be, to really care about this specific issue.
It's so sneaky though, because like you guys were saying, how many people actually pay into this industry and don't even realize they're supporting human trafficking.
Absolutely.
And that's why like conversations like this to kind of debunk what's actually happening and what you're contributing to and how it's actually affecting the value of a life. I remember when I lived in Asia, I lived in Indonesia and China for a year, and I happened to work in the entertainment industry, and in that industry you're surrounded around a lot of, sex, alcohol, and things of that nature. And I remember always seeing these women at these different like venues. And I was like, okay, these women are here. They're always here. Like every single night they're here. And I'm like, are they like prostitutes? Now, mind you, I was so young. I had no clue. And if I'm being really honest, there was an attitude that I had towards them of like, oh, that's gross and that's disgusting and this and this and that. But
it is gross and disgusting. Let's be real.
But you know, like it's their choice.
Exactly.
That's what they're
Exactly.
choosing.
Like it's gross and disgusting. And the fact like these women like not really understanding their stories and the lives and maybe even how they had those experiences. And so that was my perspective until I found myself always around these women, started to have conversations with them, and then I started hearing how their parents sold them. How they were told that they were going to the city for a certain job, and then once they came there, it was a different story, and then they would threaten their families, and sorry, it like breaks my heart, and then they would say, hey, if you don't do this, then we're going to kill your family, or if you don't do this, you're not going to have money to send back to the families, and it like broke my heart. And then I had to like really like stop and like ask for forgiveness, because here I was judging these women, but I didn't realize that's like working at like a grocery store for us. That's like the access and the pursuit that they have for these women in these underprivileged nations, and even in our communities, and even in impoverished communities where a lot of people will go, and that will be a target demographic for them to find these women. And it just broke my heart. And that's honestly where the passion and the desire to contribute really came from. And just realizing that they are just wanting a normal life and wanting to be loved and wanting to take care of people and just wanting to help. And it was just like mind-blowing.
It is, and it's heartbreaking.
Yeah, it really is.
But isn't the average age of a human sex trafficking victim, isn't it like 12 years old?
Yeah, 12 or 13. And it depends on the country. I mean, you're talking about Asian countries. Sometimes it's even younger. Sadly, the girls in countries like Thailand, Cambodia, Indonesia are being sold very, very, very young.
And boys too.
Yeah, and boys too. And often the boys are turned into lady boys. They're turned into girls. So from a very young age, they're given like hormones and breast implants and things like that. And then and castrated or not castrated, but turned into lady boys, which are like a delicacy. In this sex tourism world. And it's incredibly young. It's really heartbreaking. But that's the age that, if you think back to being a 13-year-old girl, I mean, if you remember how it felt to be a 12 or 13-year-old girl, gosh, I mean, if any boy even looked my way, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so special.
He has a crush on me.
Yeah.
I'm in love.
Yeah. He likes me. And you're so vulnerable, right? And you're just sort of discovering that you're a sexual being in a way, or that you're a feminine being. And so it really is this prime time to exploit. And so especially with social media these days, it's for those of us with, my daughter's 5 months old, so I don't have to worry about this quite yet, but for those of us with daughters, or we just have to be so aware that there are predators out there, and not to be in like a be afraid, be very afraid way, but there are predators out there on social media looking for the girls who are on Snapchat and selfieing themselves and looking really, because those types of things are a marker to a trafficker that girl is insecure, and looking for attention, and they can just come in and say, oh my gosh, you're so beautiful. I've never seen anyone so beautiful. You should be a movie star. I want to help you out. I want to take you to Hollywood or whatever.
Yeah.
And that's oftentimes in America how this happens or gets started. And overseas, it's really more common that the parents are, sadly, the parents are selling their children.
Yeah.
And so there we need to educate parents in those communities. Don't sell your children.
Yeah.
Your children have inherent value.
Yeah.
And that's where I think us sharing the gospel, or getting a message of like people have value into those communities is important. We have a mutual friend who runs an organization called Unlikely Heroes, and they're doing a lot of that work in Asia.
Yeah, they do a lot.
In Mexico.
Can you give us some, how do you make this, it feels like such a big issue, how do you bring this back to the individual? Because I know it's for me, sometimes I look at this kind of thing and I'm like, I'm so overwhelmed. What can I, little old me, do to kind of help in this area? Or, even how do we make this more real to us? Are there ways that we can bring this home as I don't know. I'm just how can we as a community make this an us issue and not a them issue?
That's such a great question. I think for each of us, there's an opportunity to look at what area of this breaks my heart the most. Mm-hmm. So I saw Marquita get very teared up when you were thinking about children being sold in overseas, right? And so if that's the issue that breaks your heart, get around an organization that's doing that specific work. In Asia, there's one called Nightlight and one called Rahab Ministries. Unlikely Heroes is doing that work. And so find out what that issue is that's breaking your heart, and then find the organization that's doing that work. Yeah. If it's policy, look at organizations like Saving Innocence. If it's, in the States, I think, so I run an organization called Sanctuary Project that we focus on employment for women coming out of trafficking, because I found that was the toughest transition for me to make, was going from that life to a community where I felt safe and in a work environment where I felt like I had dignity and purpose. And so that's just the area that I felt over the years. I've worked with other organizations, and that's the area I felt most called to, and said, okay, I want to do this. I want to work in this rebuilding area. But a lot of people are passionate about prevention. You mentioned something about kind of where it starts with pornography, and so getting involved in those areas where it's what is the seed that's leading to all this? Where does it begin? And I think it begins in sexual identity, and it begins in probably in puberty with distorted sexual preferences or things like that. And so how can we get in front of teenagers with a message of your sexuality is godly, and it's holy, and it's okay, and it's good, and it's not shameful. It doesn't need to be something you do in the dark or hide from. And so if we can get to little boys when they're 10 years old, 11 years old, 12 years old in their bedroom Googling porn, we can actually stop them from becoming the Johns that become the clients that the traffickers are providing for. And so really finding what is that area that I feel specifically called to, and then trying to find those organizations that are doing those work and partnering, partnering financially, partnering with your time and your talents, partnering even with your voices like we're doing here.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I was just going to say, there's a great resource for parents out there, and it's a book, and it's a storybook, and it's called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures. And it's a book that's designed for you to start reading to your children as young as 3 years old, and it's teaching them in a 3-year-old all the way up to 10 language about what we should be looking at and what we shouldn't be looking at, and why looking at bad pictures, what it can do to us internally. And it's just sometimes I think as a parent, I'm I don't want to read that stuff to my kids when they're 3, because I don't want to taint their innocence, and I'm you know what? If I don't start doing that first, the lens in which they first see something is going to be the truth for them.
That's exactly true.
Unless I, as the parent, get in with this message before the media does, before the world does, then that will become their truth and not the truth that is, what I believe to be true. And so just kind of getting that stuff and having conversations even earlier sometimes than you think is appropriate with little kids. Obviously use wisdom. But there are some great resources out there for parents if you really want to educate your kids from a young age. Just on, hey, you know what, looking at bad pictures, it might feel fun in the moment, but this is actually what it does to us. And here are some ways that we don't have to look at bad pictures. I know I have friends who they do something called the ankle check. I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but it's like when you're walking along and you might see a billboard that's kind of risque and like you don't want your little kids to see it. We're like ankle check, and so everyone looks at their ankles while they walk, and it's just like it's just kind of like little fun cues to do with like your little kids. Obviously, it's a different conversation when you have teenagers. I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So I'm still in that like ankle check stage, you know? And so just making it kind of fun, but making it something that we talk about, because I think like our silence on the matter is actually like, it's deafening. And we're allowing our silence to be filled with the noise of the world. And
absolutely.
Unless we have a really strong voice and we're coming to our kids and presenting this to them in a way where we can help healthily grow them into healthy adults who value their identity, then I mean, we can't blame the world if they're talking and we're not. You know? So
and like I don't think you're tainting their innocence. If anything, I think you're protecting it. Because if you're not going to talk to them, someone will, and then someone's going to give them whatever distorted perception or idea of sex and purity and all these, and identity even, and then it's going to be this like, oh well, like I don't look at it the way my parents do, and they didn't talk to me about it, so it must be shameful, and then they associate sex with shame. And like that's not at all what it is.
I think that is the biggest issue, is that when we're not talking about things, they become shameful. And I think this is an issue with trafficking in general. If we're not talking about what goes on behind the scenes, when you see a prostitute on a corner, it does become this shame thing of like, ew, gross, you know?
Exactly.
And so if we can start bringing it to the light, whatever issue it is, whether it's pornography or trafficking, all of a sudden the shame and the stigma can get removed and the truth can start to come out about what's actually going on.
And I think it takes a community, right? Because it takes parents, you know, educating their children. And I think even in our school systems, having some type of programming, I think is really important. So I would even encourage parents to support organizations that go in and actually build the self-esteem, that talk about some of these issues and help partner and collaborate with building self-esteem and identity and things like that. I run an organization called Gems United, and that's exactly what we did. We go into the elementary schools and the junior high schools, and we help build our self-esteem, and we talk about just, you know, finding your identity, finding your purpose, and just really bringing amazing women into the community that they would look up to, and just building them from the inside out. The powerful thing that I've learned with working with younger girls in particular, because our program is targeted towards young girls, is that they're actually a whole school like above. So for example, in elementary school, they're actually at a junior high school mentality, or they're getting junior high school education. In junior high school, they're getting high school education issues, whether that's sex, whether that's, I'm talking everything. I mean, I'm in the elementary school and they're talking about blowjobs. You know what I mean? So it's like, you think that they don't know, but they're hearing these things. And then when they're in high school, they're already at college and adult level. So I love what you were saying about having those uncomfortable conversations with your children a lot sooner, because other people are talking about it, and it's not going to be the truth.
Now I'm going to go home and talk to my 5-month-old.
I know.
Okay, sweetie, we got to talk.
Girl, let me tell you.
I think like having the schools join your voice and like petitioning for that, and if your kids go to a youth group or whatever it is, but at the end of the day, you are the parent. And you cannot put that responsibility to educate your children about sex on a church, on an organization, on a school. Like, it's you. Like, you're not paying for your kid to go to school to learn about sex. And so I have a lot of people who are like, well, they should be learning that at their youth group. No, they should be learning that from you if you're their parent, you know? And so just to kind of put that responsibility back into the parents' hands, like, we can't stay silent on this, and we can't disconnect, because I know for me, like, I didn't have a lot of self-esteem growing up, like as a teenager, but I also never had conversations about sex with my parents. And so when I did start having sex as a teenager, I didn't want to tell my parents. No way. I don't want to have that conversation really right now with my parents.
But they still don't know. Like immaculate conception, all three of them.
The babies appeared with like a stork, right? On your
crazy.
Did any of us hear from our parents about sex?
But I actually did. Oh, I could see your mom. I could see your mom doing it.
My parents are...
They're so awesome.
Did you learn about it for the first time from them?
I learned about sex for the first time from my parents, and I actually got in trouble because I told other... I know the girl who was like, guys, these are Barbies and they're wrong. Like they're supposed to anyway.
That was Megan's hair show for me. She was like, my parents told me how babies are made, and I'm going to tell you.
I remember getting phone calls. I remember my mom getting phone calls, and she was like, listen, you did it again. But here's the deal, though. I do want to talk about, the way that we talk about sex, too, to kids, because, or just something, if something is off, because I will say, like, things happened to me, and like, it wasn't specifically what we were told, like, tell mom and dad about this, but like from a very young age, put like the shame in me and put this weirdness in me about sex that actually wasn't triggered again until I was in a healthy relationship. Like I, had casual sex through, college and all that stuff because I was like, well, it's supposed to be bad. Like it's supposed to feel this way. It's supposed to be dangerous, and then like when I was actually in a healthy, loving relationship being like, oh my God. Like,
this is awkward.
I can do it.
No, but just feeling like something's wrong because now I'm safe and now that's when I'm triggered, you know?
Right.
And so, like, even just, I don't know, I'm not a parent yet, but, like, even maybe just saying, like, if anything feels off, and my parents told me they knew when something happened because suddenly I was afraid of the dark. Suddenly I was,
same. I wouldn't take my coat off.
Yeah, wouldn't take your coat off. Suddenly I was, like, 3 years old and, like, masturbating, and they were like, this is weird. So, like, just if you see anything, it's scary. I'm sure it's really scary as a parent to feel that way or, like, to be like, what's going on here? But just to press them and push them, I think.
But I wanted to ask you, what do you think would have been helpful if you could look back at that time, like, to maybe help someone out there, maybe a parent who's like, okay, well, how can I have that conversation? What do you think maybe would have been helpful, or maybe some questions, or maybe... Do you know what I mean? Yeah,
so I think what would be helpful, or what maybe would have been helpful, is just the pressing and being like, listen, even if it's not X, Y, and Z things that I'm listing, like, did something make you uncomfortable? Like, what happened? So, even if you have to get... just ask them, like, what made you uncomfortable, basically, like, because it's a very broad, sex is a broad spectrum, and, like, what can happen to you, and also, just affirming, like, there is nothing that you did, like, you are not dirty, you don't need to be ashamed, like, you're not a bad kid, because the belief that I had was, like, I'm a bad kid, and that's what brought this on. Because that was, like, the messaging. I was kind of a bad kid. but I thought, like, my mischievousness got me into trouble. So
I think, too, with kids, to make sure they understand that they can say no to touch. So one thing that's really helpful, I think, as parents is to make sure you're saying to your children, like, don't make them go hug Uncle Tom. They get to say yes or no. They have bodily autonomy. And so they get to say no to touch. Like, do you want to hug Uncle Tom? No, don't hug Uncle Tom. Even if it's someone you know to be a safe person. Even if it's their brother, whatever it is, making sure that they have the bodily autonomy from the time they're born to say no to touch. Because tickles and things like that, when I see children being like tickled beyond the point of comfort, I get uncomfortable because I'm like, that child needs to be able to say no to a tickle. They need to be able to say no to a hug. They need to be able to say no to kissing him on the cheek or kissing their cousin or whatever. And I think we need to be aware that, like, that no starts with us empowering them to say no.
Well, and letting them be aware of what is okay. And if you don't,
and what feels good for them.
Yeah, and as a kid, like, people are always, like, poking and, like, tickling you. And I'm like, I remember multiple times where I was like, I felt like my space was being so, like, violated and preyed on because I trusted them. And I think just, like, making sure you're having that conversation of, like, do you trust, like, how do you feel around this person? Like, especially if you're leaving them with them for, like, any period of time.
And I don't have any children yet either, but I'm always asking for advice to different parents because I watch how certain people parent, and I'm like, I love that you did that. I love that. Can you tell me more about that? There's a couple that I met, and they actually don't have secrets. They don't do secrets within their family.
That's so surprises, but no secrets.
No secrets. Good. And it was interesting because I was talking to their daughter, and I said, okay, it's a secret. And then she had said, oh, it's a secret to their parents. I said, no, we don't have secrets. And I was like, I didn't realize.
That's
And then so I
good.
pulled
It's
them
so
aside and
good.
I said, I want to understand what that is because I love what you were communicating. And they were saying that when you have secrets, you know, an adult can prey on that and they can touch a kid inappropriately. They can, and like, oh, it's our secret. Shh, don't tell anyone.
That's even a
that's
way
so
in. A lot of adults will be like, can you keep a secret?
Exactly.
And they test a child oftentimes before they do any form of sexual abuse. They'll test a
Exactly.
child to see how A, susceptible they are, and B, how if they're going to tell or not.
Yes.
And so that, like, I was told that as well when I first started parenting, is like, don't have secrets, but have surprises.
I love
So
that
it's like,
so
even
much.
for Christmas, it's like, no, it's a surprise, but it's not a secret. Like, you know, and so having this thing with your children. And I think approaching them with their, like, there's no shame. It's like, do you have a thought about a member of the same sex? There's no shame in that because we're actually born as sexual beings.
Yeah.
We just need to learn how to manage our sexuality. We don't need to learn how to turn it off. We need to learn how to manage it. And so, like, coming at it from, like, hey, the feelings you're having, they're not bad feelings, but you get to determine what you do with those feelings.
Yeah,
and so making them the powerful person and making it so it's like, it's actually normal, you know? It's normal that people have these thoughts. It's just how we manage it. So I think that helps them not associate sex or sexual acts with shame.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Before we end off, I just want to touch on, like, did your parents talk to you or not? And, like, the one thing my parents did that, like, changed the way I looked at sex was when we reached a certain age, my mom took my sister out on her own, like, did a fun girls' weekend and made it something celebrated and was like, here, we're going to have the worst, most awkward conversation about what sex is, but we're going to go shopping, we're going to go out for supper. And
That's my kind of conversation.
Wine and dine me. No, steak dinner. No.
my dad did that with my brother as well, and it was something that, like, we actually got to look forward to.
Yeah,
And,
that's
like, oh my
great.
goodness, like, I can't wait to, like, have this time with my mom where she gets to teach me about this. I do believe that because my parents, they treated it as something that was almost sacred and valuable, it made me look at myself in a different way. And I was like, I don't want to just, like, go off with all these guys. Like, I don't want to do that because I know that, like, emotionally that would wreck me if I'm just doing all these things. And it also taught me to, like, also respect my parents. And so one thing we did, it was like when I turned 13, or my siblings too, we did a bar mitzvah, which is a Jewish tradition where you, like, commit to staying pure until you're married. And like, I had, we had all my family come over, and, like, it was super meaningful and beautiful, and it was exciting because it was celebrating purity, and it was celebrating who we were as, like, an individual. And so, like, and then all the men in the family would just come and they'd pray for us and just be like, and my dad would just honor us as adults, and that really is what it was for us. And it was like this exciting time where I saw the value, and I also recognized the place that, like, my dad had in where he really loved and valued me as an individual and as an adult.
So beautiful.
That's amazing.
It's almost like you got your family backing you up on that as well. Like, they're standing there and committing to you and to your purity. And it's
and
like,
to
oh, I don't have
protect
to
it.
fight this on my own.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
beautiful.
I love that.
And I love the role of men being like, hey, we're
Yes.
standing for this value
Yeah.
in your life.
Yeah.
We're
Yeah,
going to protect
absolutely.
you.
Yeah.
So
It's not
important.
just like, oh, you're a woman, so, like, stay away from all men. It's like men are rallying around you
Yeah.
as a valuable person, and that your purity is valued too.
It's funny. I went to a lot of bar and bat mitzvahs growing up, and I mostly made out with guys in the bushes.
I know. I was
As
like,
soon as you said that, I was like, wow, that's what the bar mitzvahs
I thought you just get a lot of money and, like, get on a chair.
You had, like, the Torah portion, and then you, like, and then there's a party, and then you make out with guys in the bushes. No?
So we're not traditional. We're not from a traditional Jewish.
You're Canadian
I'm Canadian.
Jewish.
I'm very much not at all Jewish.
I guess it's different in Canada.
Yeah.
'Cause in America,
In New
we just
York,
hang out in the
it's like
bushes.
you just get a lot of money and you have it for a really long time.
One thing my parents love is they really cherish tradition, and they also love researching everything. So what they did was they went and researched what it was traditionally. And there were no boys there at my bar mitzvah. So
Wow.
No one to
it
make out
was
with.
just my family.
No one to make out with.
No one to make out with. And now my first kiss, I was in my 20s. But it created value and honor over
Absolutely.
like growing up into adulthood and growing up feeling valued. Like in that moment, like I felt so valued and cherished and encouraged and protected by my family that like I was like, I don't want to do anything that would like change how I view myself or this moment.
And there was joy over it. I
Yes.
love that it was like this joyous thing of like, I'm going to take you out and we're going to celebrate your sexuality because it's so joyful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like if God could sit down and have that conversation with us, it would be like this whole joyful thing, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like,
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like we're created to be these sexual beings. We're created to experience joy in it. And your parents did such an incredible job of modeling that. It's
Yeah.
amazing.
I'm very
Well done,
thankful.
parents.
yeah, well
Very
done.
thankful. Thanks, Marlon and Susan.
Well, we are not done talking about this topic. Join us for our next episode when we continue our conversation about anti-trafficking awareness and also, I guess, sexuality. We're in it. So we'll see you next time.
Bye.